It started like any ordinary evening. Emily and I sat across from each other at the dinner table, but the atmosphere was different. Heavy. The silence between us wasn't the comfortable kind we'd grown used to over the years. It was brittle, like it might shatter at any moment. She wasn't eating, just stirring her fork around her plate, eyes darting anywhere but at me. I knew something was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the bomb she was about to drop. "I love him," she said suddenly, her voice sharp and cutting through the silence. My hand froze mid-air, the glass of water I was about to lift to my lips trembling slightly. I stared at her, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "What?" The word came out softer than I intended, almost a whisper. Her eyes finally met mine, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before: resolve. There was no guilt, no shame, just a quiet determination that sent a chill down my spine. "I love him," she repeated, "and I'm never coming back." The weight of her words pressed down on me like 1,000 bricks. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to fight for what we'd built. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, trying to reconcile this stranger with the Emily I'd loved for years. "All right," I said finally, my voice calm and measured. Too calm. I could tell she wasn't expecting that reaction. Her brows furrowed, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by that same cold determination. "I thought you'd be angry," she admitted, her tone cautious now. Angry? I wasn't sure I had the capacity to feel just one emotion at that moment. Anger was there, yes, simmering beneath the surface, but it was accompanied by a crushing sadness, a sense of betrayal so profound it left me numb. What would anger solve? I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. My calmness seemed to unnerve her, and for some reason, that gave me a small sense of satisfaction. She stood up then, pushing her chair back with a scrape that echoed through the room. "I'll be staying with him," she said, as though it was a decision she'd made long ago and was only now telling me out of some sense of obligation. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out: a plea for her to stay, an accusation, or something even uglier. She hesitated for a moment, as though waiting for me to say something, anything, but I didn't. I couldn't. And then she left, the sound of the door closing behind her reverberating through the now empty house. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the chair she'd vacated. Her words replayed in my head like a broken record. "I love him. I'm never coming back." The life we'd built together flashed before my eyes. The vacations, the late-night conversations, the promises we made to each other. How had we gone from that to this? Where had I gone wrong? I wanted to blame her, to paint her as the villain in this story, but a small voice in the back of my head whispered that maybe I had a part in this too. But then another thought took root, one that was colder, harder. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an abandonment. She didn't just fall out of love with me. She fell in love with someone else while we were still married, still sharing a life. She made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I poured myself a drink, the burn of the whiskey grounding me in the moment. I could feel the storm brewing inside me, but I refused to let it consume me. I wouldn't beg her to stay. I wouldn't chase after her. And I certainly wouldn't let her think she could come crawling back when her fantasy with him inevitably crumbled. If she was gone, then so be it. But I'd make sure there was nothing left for her to return to. The thought settled into my mind like a seed, small and quiet, but full of potential. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wouldn't play the victim. As the night stretched on and the house grew darker, I made a silent vow to myself. I would rise from this, stronger, smarter, and untouchable. Emily might have walked out the door, but she didn't take everything with her. Not yet. The silence after she left wasn't just a void. It was a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, wrapping itself around every corner of the house. I sat alone at the dining table, staring at her untouched plate. She'd barely eaten a thing, and now I realized she hadn't been eating much for weeks. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The late nights at work, the sudden need for privacy, the distracted way she spoke to me. I saw them all in hindsight, but back then, I chose to trust her, chose to believe that our marriage was solid. I stared at the empty seat where she had delivered those words. I love him, and I'm never coming back. They were still echoing in my mind, twisting like a knife lodged in my chest. It was almost laughable how calmly she said it, as if she were telling me she decided to change her hairstyle or quit her job, not walk out of our marriage and into someone else's arms. I sat there for hours, lost in the memories of the life we'd built. The vacations, the laughter, the dreams we shared, they all felt like lies now. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. This wasn't the first betrayal. This was just the final one. There had been 1,000 little betrayals before this. Moments when she pulled away emotionally, when she chose herself over us. I'd ignored them, thinking they were just the natural ebbs and flows of a relationship. Now, I knew better. At some point, I made my way to the living room, collapsing onto the couch. The house felt too big, too empty without her presence. I glanced at the coffee table, where a framed photo of us sat. It was from our trip to Italy a few years ago, both of us smiling in front of the Colosseum. I picked it up, staring at her face. She looked so happy, so in love. I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat as I realized that person didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I poured myself drink after drink, each one numbing the sharp edges of my thoughts, but never dulling them completely. By the time dawn broke, I was still sitting on the couch, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, and disbelief battled for dominance. But one thing became clear. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I thought about calling someone, maybe Marcus, my best friend since college. He'd always been the one to give me perspective when things got tough. But I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Admitting what had happened felt like admitting failure, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Lisa's name. She worked with Emily, and if anyone could give me the truth about what had been going on, it was her. I hesitated for a moment before sending a simple text. Emily's gone. I need answers. Can you call me? As I waited for her reply, I began to think about what Emily's life might look like now. Was she with him already? Were they laughing at my expense, celebrating their freedom? The thought made my stomach churn, but it also ignited a spark of something else. Resolve. She thought she could leave me, walk away from everything we built, and still keep her safety net intact. She thought she could waltz back in if things with him didn't work out, but she was wrong. I grabbed a notebook and pen from the side table, flipping it open to a blank page. It was time to make a plan. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her win. As the morning sun filtered through the blinds, I began to write. Each word, each idea, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about me. About taking control of my life and ensuring that when she realized her mistake, there would be nothing left for her to return to. The storm was coming, but I was ready to face it. The first thing I realized after Emily left was that I couldn't allow myself to spiral into despair. It wasn't in my nature to be the man who just lies down and lets life trample him. I had to act. I had to move forward. The silence of the house was overwhelming, but in that silence, I found clarity. The more I thought about her words, I love him, and I'm never coming back, the more determined I became. She thought she had one. She thought she could waltz into a new life with him, leaving me to pick up the pieces. No, I wasn't going to let that happen. The first step was the finances. Emily always liked to think she was the savvy one when it came to money, but in truth, I'd been the one managing our accounts all along. She had access to them, of course, but I was the one who knew every detail, where the savings were, how much was in each account, and which assets were in whose name. Sitting down at my laptop, I logged into our joint account. It was as much hers as it was mine, but that no longer felt fair. She'd forfeited her claim the moment she chose him over us. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I started transferring the bulk of the funds into my personal account. The number in the joint account dwindled rapidly until only a token amount remained. Was it petty? Maybe. But this wasn't about being petty. It was about protecting myself. Emily had already shown me what she was capable of. I wasn't going to leave myself vulnerable to whatever schemes she and her new man might dream up. When the transfers were complete, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a small sense of satisfaction for the first time since she'd left. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next step was the credit cards. Emily had a few in her name, but we also had a joint card that I knew she used frequently. I called the bank and canceled it, ensuring she be cut off from that source of spending. "Can I ask why you're canceling?" the representative asked. "Let's just say I don't want to finance someone else's happiness," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. With the finances taken care of, I turned my attention to our assets. We owned a house, a car, and a few investments. The house was the biggest piece of the puzzle, and I knew I'd need to act quickly if I wanted to reclaim it before she tried to stake her claim. I called Marcus, my best friend and a financial advisor. If anyone could help me navigate this, it was him. "She's gone," I told him bluntly when he answered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Gone?" he repeated. "She left," I explained, "for someone else. And I'm not going to let her walk away with what we built together." "Damn," Marcus muttered. "I'm sorry, man. What do you need from me?" "Help me secure the house," I said. "I want it in my name only. She can have the memories, just not the property." Marcus hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "All right," he said. "But you're sure about this? Once you do it, there's no going back." "There's nothing to go back to," I replied. Hanging up the phone, I felt the weight of my decisions settling over me. This wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about making a statement. Emily thought she could leave me behind and still keep her safety net intact. She thought I'd wait for her, that I'd be here when she realized her mistake. But I wasn't going to be that man. By the time I finished securing the finances and starting the process to take full ownership of the house, it was well past midnight. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window at the dark street outside. For the first time since she left, I felt like I was in control. This was only the beginning. She might think she's starting a new life, but she had no idea what was coming. One thing was certain. When she finally looked back, she wouldn't find me standing there, waiting for her. She'd find nothing at all. The house felt different after Emily left. Emptier, colder. Every room echoed with memories I didn't want to relive. Her laughter, her perfume, the way she always left a mug half full on the counter. It was all still here, haunting me like a ghost. I couldn't live like this, surrounded by the remnants of someone who had chosen someone else over me. So, I began erasing her. It started in the bedroom. I opened her closet, a place I hadn't dared to venture since she walked out. Her clothes still hung neatly, each one a reminder of a shared life that was now shattered. My fingers brushed over a silk blouse she loved, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then her words rang in my ears. "I love him, and I'm never coming back." The hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold determination. I grabbed a large trash bag and began pulling her clothes off the hangers, one by one. Each piece felt like shedding a layer of the pain she'd left behind. The dresses she wore to our date nights, the sweaters I'd bought her for Christmas, all of it went into the bag. When the closet was empty, I stood back and felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Next were the drawers. Jewelry, scarves, her ridiculous collection of scented candles. It all went into the bag. There was no sentimentality left in me. These things were hers, not ours, and they had no place in my life anymore. As I worked, I found little things I hadn't noticed before. A receipt from a restaurant I'd never been to, dated just a few weeks ago. A small tube of lipstick I didn't recognize. These weren't just her belongings. They were pieces of a life she'd been living without me. My chest tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I pushed it down. There was no point in dwelling on it now. She was gone, and this was just confirmation that she'd been leaving long before she said the words out loud. Once the bedroom was cleared, I moved to the living room. The photos of us that lined the walls were the first to go. Smiling faces stared back at me as I pulled them from their frames. I hesitated at one picture, a snapshot of us on our wedding day. I remembered how happy I'd felt in that moment, how certain I was that we'd be together forever. But that man was gone now, just like the woman in the photo. I dropped it into the trash bag without a second thought. Her books, her knickknacks, the throw pillows she insisted on buying because they tied the room together. All of it went into the pile. By the time I was finished, the living room looked bare, but it also felt lighter. It was as if her presence had been suffocating the space, and now I could finally breathe again. The last stop was the bathroom. Her toiletries were still lined up on the counter, the bottles and jars a reminder of the woman who used to stand there every morning, getting ready for her day. I swept them into another bag without pausing, the clatter of glass and plastic echoing through the room. By the time I was done, the house no longer felt like hers. It didn't feel like ours either, but that was okay. It was a blank slate now, and I needed that. I loaded everything into my car and drove to a donation center on the other side of town. As I handed over the bags, the volunteer smiled and thanked me. She had no idea what she was taking from me, or what I was leaving behind. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and stood in the middle of the now empty living room. The walls were bare, the shelves empty, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel overwhelmed. This was my space now, free of her shadow. I knew this was just one step in a long process, but it felt significant. Emily had left, and now her things were gone too. She'd walked away from our life, and I was making sure there was no trace of her to come back to. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about survival. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Erasing her presence from the house wasn't just a physical act. It was symbolic. It was the first real step toward reclaiming my life. And as I stood there in the quiet, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build something better from the ashes she left behind. The house had always been the heart of our life together. It was where we celebrated anniversaries, hosted family dinners, and spent lazy Sunday afternoons. Every corner held a memory. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the moments we shared. But now, with Emily gone, it felt more like a tomb than a home. I couldn't stay there. Not like this. Not surrounded by the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. It was time to let go. It was time to sell the dream. I knew Emily had always been attached to the house. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything she'd wanted. We designed it together, picked out the furniture, made decisions on every little detail. She had poured her heart into it, but that was before she chose him. Now, it felt like a prison. The first thing I did was call the realtor. "I'm ready to list it," I told him, my voice steady. He didn't ask any questions, which I appreciated. He just agreed to meet the next day. When I walked through the house, it felt strangely empty, like a shell. The furniture was still in place. The family photos still hung on the walls. I walked through the rooms, taking stock of everything I would have to change before listing it. The house needed a facelift. No one would want to buy a house full of memories that didn't belong to them. I called a contractor friend, David, and asked him to come over. "I need to make this place feel fresh, neutral," I explained. "You know, get rid of any personal touches." David was over in a few hours, and we walked through the house together. He made a list of repairs, changes, and improvements. "New paint on the walls," he said. "Maybe switch out some of these old fixtures. A few minor fixes here and there, and this place will be ready to sell." It felt like I was erasing more of our life with every decision. The curtains she'd picked out, the colors she loved, the furniture that had once made this house feel like home. None of it would be here much longer. I told myself it was necessary, that it was the right thing to do. But there was a part of me that hesitated. I remembered when we first moved in, how excited we'd both been. We'd stood in the empty rooms, imagining what our life would look like here, our future unfolding in the walls of this house. Those dreams had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of her departure. And now, all of it had to go. Over the next few days, the house transformed. The walls were painted a neutral beige, the furniture was rearranged, and the personal touches, her books, her artwork, the little knickknacks she'd picked up from our travels, were gone. The place was starting to feel like a show home, a blank canvas for someone else to imagine their future. I wasn't ready to say goodbye, not completely, but I knew it was necessary. If I held on to this house, it would only keep me anchored to a past that Emily had already moved on from. I couldn't afford to be stuck in the past any longer. When the house was finally ready, I called the realtor back and arranged for the first showing. The moment he stepped into the house, I felt a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't my home anymore. I was just a visitor, preparing to hand it over to someone else. "Looks great," the realtor said, walking through the rooms. "We'll have no trouble getting this sold." I nodded but didn't speak. It felt surreal, watching him walk through the house like it was just another property to sell, just another listing. I wondered if Emily would ever walk through this house again, whether she'd come back to see how different it was. But I pushed the thought aside. This was my decision. I had to move on. The listing went live the next day, and the showings began almost immediately. Each potential buyer who walked through the door was another step toward cutting ties with the past. Some of them liked the house, but none of them seemed right. I wanted to make sure that whoever took this house from me appreciated it, that they could live the dream we had once imagined. But as the days passed and the offers started rolling in, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, resentment, even a little fear. What would my life look like without this place, this anchor to everything we had built? Would I be able to build something new? The moment the papers were signed and the house was sold, I stood in the empty living room, staring at the walls that had once held so many memories. The last vestiges of our life together were gone, but there was a sense of finality to it now. The house had been sold, the life we had built was gone, and the only thing left was the future. I wasn't sure what that future held, but I was done looking back. This chapter of my life was over, and it was time to turn the page. The house had been a dream for both of us, but now it was someone else's dream to chase. I was free to chase my own. The house may have been sold, but my work wasn't done. I realized that it wasn't just the physical space that tied me to Emily. It was the countless items, trinkets, and reminders scattered throughout my life. Her presence lingered in places I hadn't even thought to look. In drawers, in closets, even in my car. Every object carried a weight, a memory, and I couldn't move forward until I got rid of them all. I started with the attic. It was a place we rarely went, where things we didn't need but couldn't bring ourselves to throw away were stored. As I climbed the creaky wooden steps, I felt a wave of unease. What would I find up there? What pieces of her would I have to confront? The attic was dimly lit, the single bulb casting long shadows over the stacks of boxes. Most were covered in dust, untouched for years. I opened the first one and immediately saw it. A collection of old photo albums. Flipping through them, I saw our smiles frozen in time, each picture a snapshot of happier days. Trips we'd taken, holidays we'd celebrated, moments I thought were unshakable. For a brief moment, I considered keeping them. Maybe one day, I'd want to look back, to remember the good times. But then her voice echoed in my mind. "I love him, and I'm never coming back." The photos weren't memories anymore. They were lies. I closed the album and set it aside, resolving to throw it out with everything else. Next, I opened a box labeled Keepsakes. Inside were souvenirs from our trips, little mementos she had insisted on buying. A small Eiffel Tower from Paris, a seashell from our beach trip, a coffee mug from that time we got lost in the mountains and stumbled upon a tiny diner. Each one was a trigger, a reminder of the life we'd shared. I threw them into a trash bag without hesitation. As I worked my way through the attic, I found things I had forgotten about. The anniversary card I'd written for her but never gave, a scarf I'd bought her during our first winter together, the dried flowers from our wedding day. It was like peeling back layers of a wound that hadn't fully healed. But with each item I discarded, I felt lighter, as though I was shedding the weight of her betrayal. Once the attic was cleared, I moved to the garage. Her bike was still there, propped against the wall where she'd left it. She had always talked about taking up cycling, but like so many of her plans, it never materialized. I donated it to a local charity. Let someone else put it to use, I thought. Even my car wasn't safe from her lingering presence. I found an old lipstick tube in the glove compartment, a scarf draped over the back seat, and a pair of sunglasses she'd forgotten. It was astounding how deeply she had embedded herself in my life, how hard it was to untangle her from it. The final stop was my closet. Most of her clothes were gone, but there were still traces of her. A pair of earrings on the dresser, a bracelet in a drawer, a perfume bottle on the shelf. I packed them all away, careful not to let sentimentality creep in. These were just objects, I told myself, and objects could be replaced. As the pile of discarded items grew, so did my sense of freedom. By the end of the day, I had filled several bags and boxes, each one a symbol of the life I was leaving behind. I loaded them into my car and drove to the donation center. The volunteer greeted me with a warm smile as I handed over the items. "Are you sure you want to part with all of this?" she asked. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "I'm sure." Driving home, I felt an odd mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course. How could there not be? But there was also relief. Each item I discarded was another step toward reclaiming my life. When I got back to the house, it felt different. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. The absence of her things made the space feel less like a reminder of her betrayal and more like a blank canvas. I sat on the couch and stared at the empty walls, finally able to breathe deeply. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about cleansing, about taking control of my life and creating room for something new. Emily had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The past was gone, boxed up and donated to strangers. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt like mine alone. It wasn't long after I cleared out the house that I started hearing whispers about Emily and her new life. I hadn't sought them out. I wasn't interested in torturing myself with details about her and him. But people talk, and sometimes the truth finds you whether you want it or not. The first call came from Lisa, my inside source at Emily's office. "I thought you'd want to know," she said cautiously. "Emily and Jason moved into a new apartment downtown. Fancy place. Guess they're playing house now." I didn't respond immediately. The thought of them together, building a life on the ruins of ours, hit harder than I expected. "Good for them," I said finally, trying to sound indifferent. But Lisa wasn't done. "People at work are talking," she continued. "Jason's been bragging about how perfect everything is. But," she trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. "But what?" I pressed, unable to help myself. "He's been out late. With other women." The words hung in the air between us. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Of course, Jason was already chasing other women. Men like him didn't settle down. They collected trophies. And Emily, blinded by whatever charm she thought she saw in him, had made herself his latest prize. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, ending the call before Lisa could offer any more pity. I didn't need her sympathy, and I didn't need the details. But as much as I wanted to move on, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering. I imagined them in their expensive apartment, her decorating it like she had our house, him coming home late with lipstick on his collar. Was she happy? Was she starting to see the cracks in her perfect new life? Weeks passed, and the whispers continued. Marcus, my ever-loyal friend, sent me a photo one day. It was Jason, laughing at a bar with his arm around a woman who definitely wasn't Emily. "Thought you might like to see what you're missing," Marcus joked. I stared at the photo for a long time, a mix of emotions churning in my chest. On one hand, I felt vindicated. Emily had traded me for this guy, a man who couldn't even stay loyal for a few months. On the other hand, I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger. Just a hollow sort of realization that her betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. One evening, Lisa called again. "Emily's been different at work lately," she said. "Quieter. She doesn't talk about Jason anymore. Why are you telling me this?" I asked, a touch of irritation creeping into my voice. "Because I think she's starting to regret it," Lisa replied softly. "She hasn't said anything, but you can see it on her face. She looks lost." The idea of Emily regretting her decision didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. If anything, it just made me tired. I didn't want her regret. I didn't want anything from her. She'd made her choice, and I was doing my best to move on. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what her life looked like now. Was she realizing that Jason wasn't the man she thought he was? Was she starting to miss the stability, the partnership, the love we once had? Or was she too proud to admit she'd made a mistake? I didn't have to wait long for answers. A mutual acquaintance ran into Emily at a coffee shop and sent me a message. "She didn't look good," they wrote. "Tired, thin, like she hasn't been sleeping." I read the message and deleted it immediately. I didn't need to know. It wasn't my concern anymore. But the truth was, I did know. I could picture it all too clearly. Her sitting in that fancy apartment, staring at the empty space beside her where Jason used to be. She'd left me for a fantasy, and now she was living with the reality. And yet, as much as I wanted to gloat, I couldn't. Her suffering wasn't my victory. Her pain wasn't my redemption. All I could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time, leaving her behind with every step. As I sat in my now empty house, sipping a drink and looking out at the quiet street, I realized something. I didn't need to watch her fall apart. I didn't need to know how her story ended, because mine was just beginning. It was a cold evening when the knock came, a hesitant, almost timid sound that broke the quiet rhythm of my new life. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus and Lisa usually called before visiting, and no deliveries were scheduled. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Whoever it was could come back another time, but something drew me to the door. When I opened it, I froze. Standing on the porch, drenched from the rain and trembling like a leaf, was Emily. She looked nothing like the confident, determined woman who had sat across from me and declared she was leaving. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her eyes, once full of resolve, were hollow. She didn't look like someone who had one. She looked like someone who had lost everything. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, a flood of emotions crashing over me. Anger, pity, confusion. They all fought for dominance, but I kept my expression blank. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold and detached. I needed to talk to you," she said, shifting nervously under my gaze. "Talk?" I repeated, incredulous. "After everything, you think we have something to talk about?" Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. "Please," she said, "just hear me out." I stepped aside and let her in, more out of curiosity than kindness. She walked into the living room and stopped short, looking around as though she barely recognized it. The walls were bare, the furniture rearranged, her presence completely erased. "What happened to the house?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I sold it," I replied flatly. Her head whipped around to face me. "Sold it? What did you expect, Emily?" I said, crossing my arms. "You left. I wasn't going to sit here waiting for you to change your mind." She sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. "I made a mistake," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Jason, he wasn't who I thought he was. He lied to me, cheated on me. I thought I loved him, but I was wrong." I stared at her, my heart a strange mix of triumph and detachment. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so." Part of me wanted to yell, to remind her of the pain she'd caused. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms. "And now you're here," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "What do you want, Emily? My sympathy? My forgiveness? A place to stay?" She flinched at my words but didn't deny them. I wanted to come back. To fix things. Too. I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Fix things? Emily, there's nothing left to fix. You destroyed everything when you walked out that door." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they didn't move me. "I was wrong," she said again, her voice shaking. "I thought I wanted more, but I didn't. I had everything I needed with you, and I threw it away. I'm so sorry." Her apology hung in the air, but I felt no satisfaction in hearing it. It was too little, too late. "Sorry doesn't change anything," I said, my tone hard. "It doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't erase the nights I spent wondering where I went wrong, or the months I spent picking up the pieces of my life after you shattered it." "I know," she said, sobbing now. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a second chance." I stood there for a long moment, watching the woman who had once been my whole world reduced to this broken, desperate version of herself. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need her apology, her regret, or even her love. "You're right," I said finally. "You don't deserve my forgiveness, and you're not going to get it." Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face full of shock and despair. "Please," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Emily. You walked out of my life and into his, and now you have to live with that decision. I'm done. I walked to the door and held it open, my heart steady and unyielding. Goodbye, Emily. For a moment, she just sat there, as though she couldn't believe what was happening. But eventually, she stood, her movements slow and hesitant. She walked past me, pausing at the door as though she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She stepped out into the rain, and I closed the door behind her. As I stood there in the silence, I felt a strange sense of relief. This wasn't closure, it was freedom. Emily's chapter in my life was over, and I was finally ready to turn the page. After Emily walked out into the rain that night, I thought I was done with her. I thought I had said everything that needed to be said, made it clear that there was no place for her in my life anymore. But life has a way of circling back when you least expect it, and Emily wasn't quite ready to let go. It was a week later when she came back. This time, she didn't knock. I found her sitting in the living room when I came home from work, as if she still belonged there, as if the months of betrayal and abandonment had never happened. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. "You had your chance," I replied coldly, dropping my keys onto the counter. "I thought I made myself clear the last time." "I know," she said, standing up, "but I couldn't leave things like that. Please, just hear me out." I wanted to tell her to leave, to walk back out the door and never come back. But something in her voice stopped me. There was a desperation there that I hadn't heard before, a kind of raw vulnerability that made me pause. Against my better judgment, I gestured for her to sit down. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands as she struggled to find the words. "I've made so many mistakes," she began, her voice breaking. "I let my pride, my selfishness, blind me to what I had. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was regret." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall as I listened. "And now what?" I asked. "You expect me to just forget everything and take you back?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I know I don't deserve that. I know I don't deserve you. But I need you to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to find something I thought was missing." I let out a bitter laugh. "And did you find it?" She flinched at the question, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No," she whispered. "All I found was emptiness. Jason, he used me. He didn't love me. He didn't even care about me. And when he left, I realized how much I'd thrown away. You, us, everything we built." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her betrayal. "You made your choice, Emily," I said, my tone hard. "You walked out of my life and into his. You don't get to come back just because your new life didn't work out." "I know," she said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm begging you, please, give me a chance to make it right." I stared at her, my emotions a turbulent mix of anger, pity, and something I couldn't quite name. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built my life around. And now she was broken, desperate, and clinging to the hope that I might still care. But I didn't. Not anymore. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about giving you a second chance. This is about me finally taking control of my life, about not letting you dictate how my story ends." Her lower lip quivered, and she looked at me as though she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "You've changed," she said softly. "You're right," I replied. "I have, and I have you to thank for that." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Finally, I stepped forward and opened the door. "This is goodbye, Emily. For good this time." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the man I used to be. But she didn't find him. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had risen from the ashes of her betrayal. With a final, tearful glance, she walked out the door. And this time, I didn't watch her leave. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the closure I thought I needed, but it was enough. I had faced her, confronted the past, and let it go. Emily was part of my story, but she wasn't the ending. She was just a chapter, and now that chapter was closed. When I closed the door behind Emily that final time, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't heavy or oppressive anymore. It was clean, clear, a quiet that spoke of new beginnings. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, letting it all sink in. The woman who had been the center of my world, the source of my greatest joy and deepest pain, was truly gone. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't closure, it was freedom. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild. Not the life I had with Emily, that was dead and buried, but something entirely new, something that was mine and mine alone. I moved into a smaller, modern apartment on the other side of town. It was a blank slate, free of memories and baggage, and I took my time filling it with things that brought me peace. For the first few weeks, I kept to myself. I needed the solitude, the quiet to process everything. But slowly, life started to creep back in. Marcus came over one evening with a six-pack and a grin. "You're too young to be sitting around like some retired old man," he said, shoving a beer into my hand. We sat on my new couch, talking about everything and nothing. He didn't bring up Emily, and I was grateful for it. Instead, we laughed about old times, reminisced about college, and talked about his latest work drama. It felt good to reconnect with the world, to remind myself that there was more to life than heartbreak. A week later, Lisa invited me to a small gathering at her place. "It's not a big party," she assured me, "just a few friends. You need to get out of that apartment." At first, I hesitated. The thought of walking into a room full of strangers, making small talk, felt exhausting. But Lisa was persistent, and I eventually gave in. The gathering was exactly what I needed, low-key and filled with genuine people. I met a few new faces, shared a drink or two, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of Emily's betrayal pressing down on me. One of Lisa's friends, a woman named Claire, caught my attention. She was smart, funny, and refreshingly direct. We spent most of the evening talking, and by the time I left, I realized I hadn't thought about Emily once. Claire and I exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we started meeting up for coffee, then dinner. It wasn't love at first sight. After everything I'd been through, I wasn't ready for that, but it was something. A spark, a connection, a glimpse of what could be. Through it all, I felt myself growing stronger. Each day, I took another step away from the man I had been, the man who had been shattered by Emily's betrayal, and closer to the man I wanted to be. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and even started going to the gym again. The transformation wasn't just external. Inside, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't had in years. I realized that Emily's departure, painful as it was, had been the wake-up call I needed. She had forced me to confront my weaknesses, to reevaluate my life, and to rebuild myself from the ground up. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I found myself thinking about Emily, not with anger or sadness, but with acceptance. She had been a part of my life, a chapter in my story, but she didn't define me. I did. I thought about the man I had been when we were together, so focused on keeping her happy, so willing to sacrifice my own needs to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. And then I thought about the man I had become, stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. Emily's betrayal hadn't broken me. It had forged me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I raised my glass to the future. I didn't know what it held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was the one I needed. And as I sat there, basking in the quiet peace of my new life, I realized something profound. I didn't need her to come back. I didn't need her at all. I was whole, and I was ready to write the next chapter of my story, on my terms, in my way, with no one else holding the pen.